The chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, the string quartet played softly, and every guest admired the glamorous wedding of Vanessa and Michael. It was a night dripping with elegance, where every flower, every crystal glass, and every smile seemed choreographed to perfection. For most people, it was a dream. But for me, Emily, sitting quietly at the back with my husband Mark, it felt more like walking into a lion's den. I was 6 months pregnant, tired and nervous. Mark hadn't been attentive lately, and his silence during the car ride here weighed heavier than the baby in my belly. He didn't hold my hand, didn't check if I was comfortable, didn't even notice when I sighed. To him, I might as well have been invisible. Still, I told myself to stay strong. This was his brother's wedding. I had to smile, to show grace, to prove that I belonged, even if I came from an ordinary background. Vanessa, the bride and now officially my sister-in-law, had always treated me with polite coldness, her words sugar-coated but sharp underneath. Tonight, though, she looked radiant in white lace, her eyes glittering, not with love, but with something darker every time they landed on me. I felt it, a storm brewing beneath the silk and champagne. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and the room was filled with laughter. For a moment, I thought I could relax. I even placed my hand gently on my stomach, whispering to my unborn child that everything would be okay. But I was wrong. So very wrong. When Vanessa walked toward me during the toast, holding a tall glass of red wine, my chest tightened. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, and her heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that made my heart race. Guests turned to look. Whispers rippled across the tables. She stopped right in front of me, towering like a queen addressing her servant. Her words were sweet at first. Fake compliments about my dress, about my bravery for showing up. Laughter, polite but uneasy, spread around us. My cheeks flushed. I wanted to shrink into my chair. And then it happened. With a sudden flick of her wrist, Vanessa hurled the wine directly at me. The crimson liquid splashed across my face, down my dress, dripping onto my swollen belly. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some guests covered their mouths, others muttered in shock. I froze. The sting of humiliation burned more than the wine in my eyes. My vision blurred, not from alcohol but from tears I struggled to hold back. My heart pounded, my baby kicked, and I felt the room spinning. I turned instinctively to Mark, my husband, my protector, the father of our child. Surely he would stand up for me. Surely he would wipe the wine from my face and shield me from this cruelty. But when my eyes met his, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even look angry. Instead, his gaze slid toward Vanessa, calm, almost protective, as though her actions were justified. And in that silent, devastating moment, I realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. Before that disastrous wedding night, before the wine stunned my skin and humiliation burned deeper than fire, my life was much quieter. I wasn't born into wealth, nor did I grow up surrounded by chandeliers and tailored suits. I came from a small town, raised by parents who taught me the value of kindness and hard work. My father fixed cars in a modest garage. My mother sewed clothes for neighbors to keep food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had love. That was enough for me. At 22, I moved to the city, chasing my dream of becoming a preschool teacher. Children became my world. Their laughter, their messy art projects, their sticky hands tugging at mine. It wasn't glamorous, and the paycheck barely stretched to cover rent, but I felt proud. I was building a life on my own terms. That's when I met Mark. He was different from the men I'd known back home. Confident, charming, with a smile that could light up a room. He worked in finance, dressed sharply, and carried an air of someone who belonged in expensive restaurants and private clubs. To my surprise, he noticed me. He made me feel special, chosen, like I was the only woman who mattered in a city filled with glitter and competition. When Mark proposed, I thought I had found my fairy tale. His family wasn't thrilled, especially Vanessa, who often reminded me with her sly little smiles that I wasn't their kind of people. But Mark insisted that love was all we needed. Against all odds, we married. I stepped into a world I never felt fully welcome in. At first, I tried desperately to fit in. I bought clothes I couldn't afford, learned to smile through condescending remarks, and practiced my table manners until my hands shook at formal dinners. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always a wall. Vanessa, younger but sharper, found subtle ways to remind me I didn't belong, compliments that were really insults, questions that cut deeper than knives. Mark told me to ignore her. He said she was jealous, that she liked to stir drama. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust my husband, the man I had left my simple life for. And when I found out I was pregnant, I clung to hope. A baby would change everything. Maybe, just maybe, his family would finally see me as one of their own. But pregnancy was lonely. Mark worked late, came home distracted, often glued to his phone. I told myself it was stress, business, deadlines. I excused the distance because I wanted to keep believing in us. I wanted my child to grow up with parents who loved each other, not with the brokenness I saw creeping in. Looking back, the signs were there. The hushed phone calls, the way Vanessa suddenly seemed too friendly with Mark. The times they exchanged glances when they thought no one was watching. But I brushed it all aside, convincing myself it was just my hormones, just silly jealousy. Until that night, the wedding, the wine, the silence, and the sickening feeling that the man I trusted most was hiding a betrayal I wasn't ready to face. From the very beginning, stepping into Mark's family felt like walking into a house where the walls whispered that I didn't belong. The mansion they lived in was breathtaking. White marble floors, chandeliers bigger than my old bedroom, and portraits of ancestors staring down as if to remind me that I wasn't cut from the same cloth. I was the outsider who somehow slipped through the gates. Mark's parents were polite enough, but their politeness carried an edge. His mother, with her pearls and perfect posture, would ask about my teaching job, then quickly change the subject to something more substantial, like investments or art collections. His father rarely looked at me at all, his eyes always drifting back to his phone, as if I wasn't worth the effort. Vanessa, of course, didn't bother with polite masks. She was bold, blunt, and always knew how to twist her words like knives. She called me Sweet Emily, with a smirk, like she was speaking to a child. She'd compliment my simple style while adjusting her designer dress, her voice dripping with pity, disguised as kindness. Mark told me not to take it personally. "That's just how they are," he'd say, brushing off my tears. "Don't let them get to you." But it wasn't just them. It was him too. Slowly, I began to notice his changes. The man who once held my hand everywhere now pulled away when his family was around. The man who once bragged about my kindness now seemed embarrassed by it. At family dinners, he laughed at jokes made at my expense. He sat silently when Vanessa's comments cut me down. Every time, I searched his face for a flicker of support, but it never came. When I told him how much it hurt, he sighed like I was nagging. "Emily, stop being so sensitive. They'll come around eventually." But they never did. And I was left swallowing my pain, pretending I was fine, even as I cried myself to sleep. Then came the pregnancy. I thought it would bring us closer, that his family might finally see me as the mother of their grandchild. But if anything, it made the divide clearer. His mother insisted on doctors she approved of, questioning if I was capable of handling the stress. Vanessa mocked me for gaining weight, hinting that I was milking the pregnancy for attention. Even Mark grew more distant, coming home late, his phone buzzing with messages he wouldn't let me see. I clung to hope, telling myself love was enough. I kept thinking of the man I married, the man who once told me he couldn't live without me. But the more I looked at him, the more he felt like a stranger. His eyes no longer lingered on me. His smile no longer warmed me. His arms no longer felt like home. And on the night of Vanessa's wedding, when the wine drenched me and shame burned my skin, his reaction, or lack of it, told me everything I refused to admit. My husband wasn't just abandoning me. He might have already chosen someone else. Vanessa was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she entered a room. She had flawless skin, glossy hair, and a laugh that sparkled like champagne. To outsiders, she was dazzling, confident, witty, the life of every gathering. Guests admired her. Family praised her. Even strangers leaned in when she spoke. She knew how to captivate, how to charm, how to play the role of a perfect daughter, sister, and now bride. But beneath that polished exterior was a cruelty she wore like perfume, subtle but impossible to ignore once you got close enough. With me, Vanessa never dropped the act completely. Instead, she sharpened her words into poisoned daggers wrapped in silk. She'd tilt her head and say, "Emily, that dress looks comfortable," her eyes flicking to her friends as they hid their smirks. At dinners, she'd ask about my teaching job, then sigh loudly. It must be so hard to make ends meet on that kind of salary, making sure everyone heard. At first, I tried to laugh it off. I told myself she was just insecure, that she felt threatened because I had something money couldn't buy. Mark's love. But over time, the remarks grew bolder, the glances longer, the smirks sharper. She had a way of making me feel small without ever raising her voice. She knew exactly where to press, the cracks in my confidence, the insecurities I tried so hard to hide. When I started showing my pregnancy belly, she placed her hand on it, smiling sweetly for the room, then whispered in my ear, "Better hope you don't lose your figure forever, or Mark might start looking elsewhere." I remember staring at her in shock, wondering if I misheard, but the glint in her eyes told me I hadn't. The worst part? She always made sure others saw her as supportive. To the family, she was caring Vanessa, offering me advice about motherhood, asking if I needed anything. To me, she was relentless. Every gesture carried a hidden blade. Every word left bruises no one else could see. And Mark? He dismissed it all. "She's joking, Emily. Don't take everything so seriously." He didn't see the way her eyes lingered on him. He didn't feel the tension when she brushed past me, her perfume clinging to his shirt after family dinners. Deep down, I began to sense something was wrong. The closeness between them felt unnatural, too familiar. Sometimes I caught them sharing quick glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes she laughed too hard at his jokes, touched his arm a little too long. I tried to bury those thoughts. I told myself I was imagining it, that hormones were clouding my judgment. But every instinct screamed otherwise. And as much as I wanted to protect my marriage, the truth was starting to unravel, piece by painful piece. Still, I never expected Vanessa to be so bold, so vicious, so unafraid of consequences. Not until her wedding day, when she traded her smirks for outright humiliation. And in front of hundreds of witnesses, she showed me just how far she was willing to go. I learned early in Mark's family that silence was my safest armor. Every time Vanessa mocked me, every time his mother's eyebrows arched at my ordinary manners, every time his father barely acknowledged my presence, I bit my tongue. Smiling through pain became second nature. It was easier to let the words sink into my chest than to risk an argument I couldn't win. At family dinners, I sat quietly, while conversations spun around art galleries, investments, and luxury vacations, topics I had nothing to add to. When I tried, the room went silent for a beat, then moved on, leaving me flushed and embarrassed. Mark would squeeze my knee under the table, a silent plea for me to stop trying. So I did. I withdrew. I became invisible, even sitting right there beside him. Sometimes I'd cry in the bathroom afterward, muffling my sobs in a towel so no one could hear. Pregnancy made me more emotional, yes, but this wasn't just hormones. This was heartbreak. The man I married, the man I trusted, allowed me to suffer alone. And yet I kept hoping. I told myself if I stayed patient, if I proved my loyalty, they would soften. They would see me as more than a burden, more than a mistake. I dreamed of the day I'd place my newborn in their arms and watch their walls crumble. I wanted so badly to belong, but Vanessa made that impossible. She thrived on my silence, on the way I lowered my gaze instead of fighting back. The more I endured, the bolder she became. She'd lean close during parties, whispering insults too soft for others to catch. "You'll never fit in here, Emily. Mark deserves better. One day he'll see it too." Each word was a stone, heavy and sharp, piling inside my chest. And Mark, he didn't defend me. He'd laugh awkwardly, steer the conversation away, or pretend he hadn't heard. His silence cut deeper than Vanessa's cruelty ever could. I remember one night, after a particularly brutal dinner where Vanessa mocked my cooking, I asked Mark why he let her get away with it. His answer still haunts me. "She's family, Emily. Don't make me choose." Choose. As if my dignity and his loyalty were things he could balance on a scale. So I chose silence. I carried my pain alone, whispering my fears into the dark when no one could hear. I prayed my baby would never feel the kind of loneliness I felt, even while surrounded by people. By the time Vanessa's wedding day arrived, I had perfected the art of endurance. I dressed carefully, fixed my hair, and promised myself I wouldn't let her break me. I'd smile, I'd clap, I'd play the part of the supportive sister-in-law, no matter how much it hurt. But when the wine splashed against my skin, soaking through my dress and dripping onto the curve of my stomach, all my years of quiet suffering felt like they had been leading to this moment. And as I stood trembling in that ballroom, I realized my silence had only given her the power to destroy me. There was a time when Mark's love felt unshakable. In the early days, he held my hand everywhere we went, as if he wanted the world to know I was his. He'd leave little notes on my desk, surprise me with flowers after a long day, and kiss my forehead before I fell asleep. I believed with every beat of my heart that I was safe with him. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that warmth began to fade. At first it was subtle. Missed dinners, unanswered calls, distracted nods when I spoke. He blamed work, deadlines, stress, and I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted to think the man who promised to protect me would never let me down. Yet the changes grew too large to ignore. He stopped asking about my day. He no longer touched my growing belly with wonder like he once did. When I tried to share the baby's first kicks, he mumbled, "That's nice," without looking up from his phone. The phone. That became his lifeline, his constant companion. Late at night, when I woke to use the bathroom, I'd catch the glow of the screen illuminating his face. He'd turn it away quickly, muttering about emails, though no emails ever made him smirk like that. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he loved me, that he was just under pressure. But the colder he became, the harder it was to believe. His hugs felt obligatory, his kisses fleeting, his words hollow. It was as if the man I married had been replaced by a stranger who shared his face but not his heart. Family gatherings only made it worse. Around his parents, he acted like I wasn't there. Around Vanessa, he laughed more, smiled wider, leaned in closer. Sometimes, when I caught their eyes meeting across the room, my stomach twisted. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining things, but the unease grew every day, feeding on the silence between us. One evening, desperate for reassurance, I asked him directly, "Mark, do you still love me?" He looked startled, then irritated, as if my question was an inconvenience. "Emily, stop being dramatic. Of course I love you. Why would you even ask that?" Because I no longer felt it. Because my heart screamed for proof he refused to give. I wanted to believe his words, but they sounded more like a performance than a confession. And deep inside, a gnawing fear began to take root, that my husband's heart was already somewhere else. By the time Vanessa's wedding approached, his distance was undeniable. He barely looked at me when I dressed for the event, his eyes cold and unreadable. He didn't compliment me, didn't offer his arm as we entered the hall. I might as well have been walking alone. And when the wine hit me, burning against my skin, I turned to him one last time, silently begging for the man I once knew. But the way he looked at me then, it wasn't love, it wasn't anger, it was something far more dangerous. The heart always knows before the mind accepts it. Mine did. Long before Vanessa's wedding, long before that glass of wine shattered my dignity, I felt the cracks widening in my marriage. They began small, like hairline fractures in glass, barely visible, easy to ignore. But soon they spread, jagged and sharp, until every moment with Mark felt fragile, ready to shatter with the slightest touch. It started with excuses, late nights at the office, business trips that came out of nowhere, meetings that stretched past midnight. When I asked simple questions, his answers were clipped, rehearsed, as if he had practiced them in advance. "Don't worry, Emily. You wouldn't understand, it's work stuff." Then there were the phone calls, always stepping out of the room, always lowering his voice. Sometimes I'd catch fragments, soft laughter, the murmur of words too tender to belong in a business conversation. When I asked who it was, he'd smile tightly. "Just a client." But clients don't make a man's eyes light up like that. Clients don't leave him grinning at a blank screen after the call ends. His scent began to change too. Once, he came home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't own. Floral, expensive, unforgettable. My chest clenched. When I asked, he brushed it off with a laugh. "Probably from someone at the office." Don't be paranoid. But paranoia has a way of sinking its claws in, especially when the evidence piles up. He guarded his phone like it was a bomb, never letting it out of his sight. At night, he'd sleep with it under his pillow. And when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw the way his face softened reading certain messages, his thumbs moving quickly, almost eagerly. The cruelest part was how he treated me during all this. I became invisible. My swollen feet, my cravings, my tears, none of it seemed to matter. When I tried to share my fears about motherhood, he barely listened. When I begged him to spend more time with me, he sighed, annoyed, as if I were a burden. And then there was Vanessa. I noticed at first at family gatherings, the way their eyes found each other too often, lingering too long, the way she laughed at his jokes, touching his arm with casual intimacy, the way his attention sharpened when she entered the room, as though no one else existed. One evening, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found them standing too close, whispering. They jumped apart when they saw me. Vanessa smiled sweetly, her voice dripping honey. "Oh, Emily, we were just talking about the wedding plans." But my gut screamed the truth, that there was more between them than words. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that I was hormonal, insecure, seeing ghosts where there were none. But late at night, when Mark rolled away from me in bed, his back turned cold, my instincts whispered louder. Something was wrong. Something was broken. Something was being hidden. And deep inside, I feared the betrayal I dreaded most had already begun. The wedding of Vanessa and Michael was the kind of event people dreamed about, the kind that filled glossy magazines and made strangers sigh with envy. Every detail was flawless, down to the last rose petals scattered on the marble floors. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the ballroom, making everything shimmer with luxury. Waiters glided between tables carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres so delicate they looked like art. Guests arrived in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, snapping photos and whispering about how perfect it all was. The music swelled from a live orchestra, soft violins weaving through the air like silk. Every corner of the hall screamed extravagance, ice sculptures, towering floral arrangements, even a chocolate fountain glistening under spotlights. I sat quietly at my table, smoothing the fabric of my simple dress over my growing belly. Compared to the sequined gowns and designer heels around me, I felt like a shadow blending into the walls. But I told myself I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here because family expected me to be. Vanessa, the bride, glowed under the attention. She floated through the room in her white lace gown, smiling like a goddess among mortals. Guests showered her with compliments, and she basked in it. Every gesture calculated, every glance rehearsed. She looked perfect, untouchable. But perfection is often a mask, and I could see the cracks. I noticed how her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and quick, every time someone praised her. I noticed the smirk, tugging at her lips when Mark laughed too loudly at something she whispered. I noticed the way her hand lingered on his arm a moment too long as they toasted with champagne. The air inside that ballroom felt thick, suffocating. To everyone else, it was a night of joy, but to me, it felt like walking on broken glass. Every step, every breath threatened to cut me open. I tried to distract myself by watching the orchestra, by focusing on the flickering candles, by running my hand gently across my stomach. "It's okay, baby," I whispered silently. "We'll get through this." But my chest tightened with every laugh that wasn't mine, every glance I wasn't part of. Then came the speeches. Michael, the groom, spoke lovingly about his new wife, about their future, about promises of forever. His voice shook with emotion, and the crowd cheered, raising their glasses. Vanessa looked up at him with adoration, her eyes shimmering with tears. To anyone else, it was a picture of love. But when Michael turned away, I caught the flash of something cold in her expression. Her smile stiffened, her eyes darted toward Mark again, and in that instant, I knew. She wasn't looking at her husband. She wasn't thinking of him. I sat frozen, my palms clammy, as dread pooled in my stomach. This wasn't just jealousy anymore. This wasn't just paranoia. It was real. And as the orchestra played a sweeping melody, Vanessa began walking toward me, glass of wine in her hand, her smile sharp enough to cut. And in that glittering hall of perfection, I knew something cruel was about to happen. The music swelled as Vanessa glided across the ballroom floor, her white gown trailing like a cloud of silk. Guests smiled, expecting another toast, another dazzling performance from the radiant bride. I sat frozen in my chair, my hand instinctively covering the curve of my belly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She stopped directly in front of me, towering above my seat, holding a tall glass of red wine. The liquid glistened under the golden chandeliers, dark and rich, almost sinister in its beauty. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes burned. "Emily," she said sweetly, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You look brave tonight. It must take courage to show up here dressed like that." Laughter rippled across the tables, uneasy, confused, but laughter nonetheless. My cheeks burned as I stared at the tablecloth, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. I whispered, "Please, Vanessa, not tonight." My voice was trembling, barely audible. But she leaned closer, her perfume suffocating, and hissed, "Oh, darling, this is exactly the night." Before I could move, before I could even breathe, her arm lifted. In one swift, deliberate motion, she hurled the entire glass of red wine at me. The liquid exploded against my chest, splattering across my face, soaking through my dress, dripping down onto my stomach. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Guests covered their mouths, some rose to their feet, others whispered furiously. The orchestra faltered, strings screeching into silence. The wine was cold, but the shame was scorching. I felt the burn deep in my bones as the red stained my pale dress, spreading like blood. Tears blurred my vision, mixing with the wine on my cheeks. My baby kicked inside me, startled by the shock, and I wrapped my arms instinctively around my belly as if to shield it. I turned to Mark, my husband, my protector, my everything. I needed him to rise, to shout, to defend me, to prove that no matter what Vanessa thought of me, I had a place, I had worth. But Mark didn't move. He stayed seated, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. Then, to my horror, he shifted his gaze toward Vanessa, not with anger, but with something that looked dangerously close to understanding. Almost alliance. The silence stretched, heavy and cruel. Guests stared at me, some with pity, others with judgment. I felt exposed, broken, crushed beneath the weight of their eyes. My skin crawled, my throat tightened, and I wanted to disappear. Vanessa tilted her head, smiling victoriously. "Oh dear," she said loudly, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I'm so sorry, how clumsy of me." The crowd tittered, but no one believed it was an accident. I rose shakily to my feet, the wine dripping down my arms, my face hot with humiliation. The room spun. My knees threatened to give way. I clutched the edge of the table to steady myself, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And then, through the dizzying blur, I realized something even worse than the wine, worse than the laughter, worse than the silence. My husband's eyes met Vanessa's, and the look they shared told me this was no accident. The ballroom was no longer filled with music or laughter. Instead, it pulsed with whispers that spread like wildfire, bouncing from table to table. The once perfect celebration now felt suffocating, charged with tension thick enough to choke. I stood trembling, drenched in red wine, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. The guests didn't look away. They stared, their eyes were sharp, dissecting, each one a mirror reflecting my humiliation back at me. Some covered their mouths in shock, others leaned close to gossip, and a few simply watched with quiet satisfaction, as if my suffering was a form of entertainment. "She must have done something to deserve that," I heard a woman mutter to her companion. My ears burned. Another voice whispered, "Poor girl, pregnant and humiliated like that, how cruel." But pity cut as deeply as judgment. I could feel it in the way their gazes softened, not with compassion, but with condescension. I wasn't Emily anymore. I was the spectacle, the scandal, the woman drenched in wine on a night that wasn't hers. Vanessa thrived in the attention. She dabbed delicately at her gown with a napkin, feigning concern for herself, while slyly glancing at me with eyes that glittered with triumph. To the crowd, she was still the glowing bride who had made an unfortunate mistake. To me, she was the puppeteer, pulling every string, turning me into her entertainment. And Mark, my husband, remained frozen in silence. The absence of his voice was louder than the orchestra ever had been. Guests noticed it too. Their eyes flicked between him and me, waiting for him to rise, to protect, to speak. But he stayed seated, his lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze avoiding mine. That silence became its own kind of judgment. If my husband wouldn't defend me, why should anyone else believe in me? A man at a nearby table shook his head. "Shameful," he muttered, "not about Vanessa, but about me." As though my mere presence had invited the cruelty, as though I had ruined this perfect night. Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought them back. I couldn't give Vanessa the satisfaction of watching me break. Still, my body betrayed me, trembling, my hands clutching the tablecloth for balance. My baby kicked again, and I pressed a shaky hand against my belly, whispering in my heart, "Hold on, little one. Mommy's still here." The whispers only grew. "She looks pathetic." I'd die of embarrassment. Imagine the photos. Every word sliced into me like glass. I felt the weight of the room pressing down, suffocating me, until I could barely breathe. My lungs screamed for air, but my chest tightened, heavy with shame. The wine clung to my skin like a scarlet letter, marking me, branding me as less than. And just when I thought the night couldn't sink any lower, Vanessa leaned toward her guests, her voice sweet but loud enough to carry. "Some people," she said, raising her brows, "just don't know their place." Laughter rippled again, cruel and sharp. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision swimming, my heart breaking. I looked once more at Mark, begging silently for him to see me, to stand for me, to prove that our vows still meant something. But the way he shifted closer to Vanessa made me realize my nightmare was only beginning. For one agonizing moment, I clung to hope. Hope that Mark's silence was shock, that he was simply frozen, unable to process the cruelty that had just unfolded before hundreds of witnesses. Hope that any second he would rise, take my hand, and declare that I was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he vowed to protect. But hope has a cruel way of shattering. Mark finally stood. My heart leapt, thinking he would defend me, but instead he turned toward Vanessa. "Vanessa," he said, his tone steady, almost gentle, "don't upset yourself. It's your wedding day. Let's not let this incident ruin it." My breath caught. Incident? That's what he called it? Wine dripping down my body, humiliation searing my soul, and to him it was just an incident. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, lips pursed. They were confused, but some nodded as if agreeing with him. If my own husband wasn't outraged, why should they be? Vanessa placed her hand on his arm, her face a mask of feigned distress. "I didn't mean to," she said sweetly. "I was just nervous." My hand slipped. Nervous? I wanted to scream. Her eyes had been full of calculation, her motion deliberate. But Mark didn't question her. He didn't even look at me. "Emily's fine," he added quickly, almost dismissively, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Let's just move on." Fine? I was trembling, drenched, humiliated in front of his entire family, his colleagues, his world. But to him, I was fine, disposable, an inconvenience on someone else's big day. I searched his face, desperate to find the man I once knew, the man who swore he loved me. But all I saw was detachment, his jaw tight, his eyes cold, his body angled toward Vanessa as if shielding her. My chest ached, a hollow pain spreading through me. The betrayal wasn't in what he said, it was in what he didn't. He didn't comfort me, he didn't protect me. He didn't even acknowledge the child growing inside me. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to look at me differently, some with pity, some with disdain, but none with respect. If my husband treated me as irrelevant, then irrelevant I became in their eyes. Vanessa smiled faintly, her victory sealed. She had humiliated me, and Mark had chosen her side. Together they stood united, a pair against me, the bride and her willing accomplice. The orchestra began to play again, awkwardly trying to stitch the night back together. Laughter bubbled up in corners of the room, forced and uneasy. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heart cracking. I wanted to run, to disappear, to hide my swollen belly from their stares. But my legs felt like lead, my body rooted to the ground by shock and sorrow. My baby shifted again inside me as if sensing my despair, and tears threatened to spill. I turned toward Mark one last time, silently pleading, "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" And in that moment, the flicker of guilt in his eyes told me there was more between him and Vanessa than anyone dared to imagine. The music returned, but I couldn't hear it. The chatter swelled, but it faded into a muffled roar inside my head. My world had narrowed to the sickening reality that I was alone, utterly, devastatingly alone. The man I had promised my life to, the father of the child I carried, had looked at me with cold indifference while siding with the woman who despised me. That moment didn't just sting, it hollowed me out. It was like watching the foundation of my life crumble in a single heartbeat. I staggered back from the table, my knees weak, the wine dripping onto the polished marble like drops of blood. My dress clung to my skin, heavy and sticky. I wanted to tear it off, to escape the suffocating stares. but I had nowhere to go. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall across the room. The woman staring back looked broken, eyes wide, face streaked with red, hair disheveled. A stranger, not the Emily I once knew, not the woman who believed in love, who believed her marriage could withstand anything. That Emily was gone. I stumbled toward the hallway, my heels clicking unevenly, my hand pressed against the swell of my belly. Each step felt like dragging chains. Guests parted silently, creating a path, but none reached out to help. Their eyes followed me, judgment etched into their faces. In the bathroom, I gripped the sink, my shoulders shaking. The mirror was cruel, reflecting every ounce of my shame. Tears streamed freely now, hot and unstoppable. I tried to scrub the wine from my skin, but it clung stubbornly, a reminder I couldn't wash away. My chest heaved with sobs, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. Why? I whispered to myself. Why would he do this to me? The answer didn't come, only silence. I thought of my baby, innocent, fragile, growing inside me. I pressed both hands to my stomach, whispering through my tears. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had dreamed of giving this child a home filled with love. But what kind of world was I bringing them into if even their father chose betrayal over family? The despair sank deeper. I thought about the nights I spent waiting for Mark, dinners gone cold, texts unanswered. I thought about how I convinced myself it was stress, when deep down I knew something darker was lurking. And now, here it was, laid bare in front of everyone. For a fleeting moment, an awful thought crossed my mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong in his world. Maybe I was the mistake. Maybe my silence, my patience had allowed this to happen. I slid down the wall, curling onto the floor, my dress pooling around me, my sobs muffled against my knees. I felt small, invisible, powerless. But despair has a way of turning into fire if it burns long enough. Somewhere beneath the wreckage of my heart, a spark flickered. And as I wiped the tears from my face, I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I should have, my hands gripping the cold porcelain sink as if it could anchor me against the storm raging inside. I wanted to stay hidden forever, but weddings wait for no one. And Vanessa, she wasn't finished with me. When I finally stepped back into the ballroom, I prayed the night would move on, that the incident would fade into the background. But Vanessa had other plans. She spotted me instantly, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't joy but triumph. The orchestra played a cheerful tune. Guests raised glasses, yet the energy had shifted. Everyone was waiting to see what she would do next, waiting to see if I would crack. She didn't keep them waiting long. "Emily, darling." Vanessa's voice rang out across the hall, sweet but dripping with venom. Heads turned as she glided toward me, her gown shimmering under the lights, her glass now refilled with fresh wine. "You look so pale. Are you feeling faint? Maybe the pressure of such elevated company is too much?" A ripple of laughter broke out. My throat tightened. I forced a smile, whispering, "Please, Vanessa, enough." But she leaned closer, her words sharp enough for those nearest to hear. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. Everyone knows you've always struggled to fit in. Tonight just proves it." The laughter grew louder. My cheeks burned hotter. I wanted to disappear, but she pressed on. She raised her glass high, her voice carrying over the music. A toast to family, to loyalty, and to knowing your place in the world. The guests erupted in awkward chuckles, some clapping, others shifting uncomfortably. Every word was a dagger, every laugh an echo of my humiliation. Mark stood by her side, silent, his expression unreadable. My heart begged for him to stop this, to speak up, to do anything, but his silence screamed louder than her cruelty. He was complicit, whether by choice or by fear, and that truth tore through me. Vanessa turned back to me, her eyes gleaming. "You should be grateful, Emily. Not everyone gets the privilege of marrying into such a family. Some of us are born for it. Others—" She paused, letting her gaze travel deliberately over me, my ruined dress, my trembling hands, my swollen belly. "Well, others are better suited to simpler lives." The cruelty was deliberate, crafted to strip me of every shred of dignity. Guests whispered, some shaking their heads, others smirking. I could feel their judgment pressing against me, suffocating. I clutched my stomach protectively, whispering to my unborn child, "Hold on, baby. Mommy's here. We'll survive this." But inside, I was crumbling. Vanessa lifted her glass again, her smile radiant. "Don't worry, Emily. We'll always find a place for you. After all, every family needs a reminder of what not to be. The hall erupted with uneasy laughter, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My vision blurred, my knees weakened, and I thought I might collapse right there among them. And as I swayed on my feet, I realized if I didn't fight back soon, Vanessa would destroy me completely. While laughter rippled through the ballroom at my expense, I noticed someone else watching closely, not with amusement, not with pity, but with something sharper. Michael, the groom, Vanessa's brand new husband, stood stiffly by the head table. His glass was untouched, his jaw tight, his eyes tracking every movement his bride made. It was his wedding day. He should have been basking in love, celebrating vows, enjoying the spotlight. Instead, he looked unsettled, as though the performance around him had peeled back a mask he hadn't realized Vanessa was wearing. I caught his gaze for a fleeting second, his brow furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't sympathy he offered me. It was confusion, doubt, a seed of suspicion sprouting in real time. Vanessa, too intoxicated by her own cruelty, didn't notice. She was glowing under the attention, her laughter ringing like bells as she made me her target. She clung to Mark's arm, leaning into him just a little too comfortably, her eyes sparkling with something that looked nothing like wifely devotion. And Michael noticed that, too. He shifted in his seat, his knuckles white around the stem of his glass. His gaze darted from Vanessa's hand on Mark's sleeve, to the way Mark didn't pull back, to the looks they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. I wasn't the only one seeing it anymore. The guests remained blissfully ignorant, too caught up in the spectacle, too eager to feast on my humiliation. But Michael's face told a different story. The more Vanessa spoke, the deeper the frown lines etched into his forehead. I saw him lean toward one of his groomsmen, whisper something, then shake his head when the man responded. His eyes returned to Vanessa, studying her with a coldness I hadn't seen before. Part of me wanted to look away, to spare him the pain of discovery. He was supposed to be her partner, her forever. And yet, on the very night of their vows, he was already seeing cracks in the fairy tale. I thought about warning him, about telling him what I suspected, that Vanessa and Mark were more than just in-laws, that their stolen glances and quiet whispers weren't innocent. But how could I? My words would sound bitter, jealous, tainted by the humiliation dripping from my dress. He wouldn't believe me. Not yet. Still, something told me I wouldn't need to. Michael's eyes had already begun to see the truth for themselves. The music swelled again, and Vanessa raised her glass once more, toasting to family, loyalty, and love. Her words sparkled, but they rang hollow, echoing against the tension in the air. Michael didn't raise his glass. He didn't smile. He just stared at her, his expression hardening with every second. For the first time all night, I felt a shift. The power Vanessa held over the room wasn't as absolute as she believed. Someone was watching. Someone important. Someone with the authority to unravel everything. And as Michael set his glass down with a sharp, deliberate clink, I knew Vanessa's carefully crafted facade was beginning to crack. The laughter echoed in my ears long after the sound had died. Each cruel chuckle, each whisper, clung to me like a shadow. I stood there, drenched in wine, shaking from head to toe, pretending I was still whole when inside I was falling apart. I could feel eyes burning into me from every corner of the ballroom. Some watched with pity, others with glee, but none with compassion. To them, I was no longer a guest. I was a spectacle, a showpiece for Vanessa's cruelty. I pressed a trembling hand to my stomach, whispering silently to the child within me, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The weight of my humiliation pressed down until I could hardly breathe. My throat closed, my chest tightened, and I felt the tears rising, unstoppable. I couldn't stay another second. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I turned and fled. The whispers grew louder behind me, a chorus chasing me out of the room. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The tears blurred my vision, the wine clung sticky and cold against my skin, and my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the orchestra. The hallway was quieter, but not enough. My sobs echoed off the high ceilings, raw and broken, a sound I couldn't contain. I staggered forward, gripping the wall for support, my legs heavy, my breath ragged. I pushed open the door to a side room and collapsed inside, finally away from the stairs. My hands shook as I tried to clean the wine from my dress, but it only smeared, spreading the stain. I caught sight of myself in a gilded mirror, my face streaked with red, my eyes swollen, my hair clinging to damp cheeks. I didn't look like a bride. I didn't look like a wife. I didn't even look like me. The tears came harder. My shoulders shook, my sobs loud and unrestrained. I thought of everything I had endured, the mocking dinners, the cutting remarks, the nights of loneliness while Mark worked late. I thought of the vows we exchanged, the promises he made, the dreams I had built on his words. All of it shattered in that ballroom, trampled under the weight of Vanessa's cruelty and his silence. For the first time since marrying him, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I curled into the corner of the sofa, clutching my belly, rocking gently as if to soothe both myself and the life inside me. "We'll be okay," I whispered through the sobs. "Even if it's just you and me, we'll be okay." But deep down, fear gnawed at me. How could I raise a child alone in a world that already judged me unworthy? How could I protect my baby when I couldn't even protect myself? Footsteps echoed in the hallway. My breath caught. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe Mark had followed me. Maybe he was finally coming to hold me, to tell me everything would be all right. The door creaked open, light spilling in. And when I looked up, the figure standing there was not the man I had prayed for. The door opened wider, and in stepped Michael, the groom. For a heartbeat, I froze, startled by his presence. This was his wedding day. He should have been basking in the glow of celebration, not searching for me, the woman his new bride had humiliated. He shut the door softly behind him, the music from the ballroom muffled into silence. His expression wasn't one of joy or concern. It was grim, heavy, as if he carried a burden too great for one man to bear. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "I saw everything." The words pierced through me like a blade. My lips trembled, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Shame and sorrow knotted in my throat, threatening to drown me. "I'm fine," I lied, wiping at my stained dress. "It's your wedding day. Go back. Don't worry about me." But Michael didn't move. His eyes, dark and sharp, stayed locked on mine. "You're not fine. And this isn't just about tonight, is it?" I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his jaw tight, his voice a whisper of anger. "Vanessa? And Mark." The air left my lungs. My heart stopped. His words confirmed the fear I had buried so deep. I shook my head weakly, denying it even as the truth burned inside me. No, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," he cut in, his tone sharp. "Do you think I haven't noticed? The glances, the whispers, the way she looks at him, the way he looks back. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that it was just nerves before the wedding. But tonight?" He gestured toward my ruined dress. "Tonight?" She showed her hand, and his silence told me everything else I needed to know. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and relentless. To hear it from him, from the man she had just married, made it undeniable. The betrayal wasn't in my imagination. It was real, festering, poisoning everything. I didn't want to believe it, I whispered, clutching my belly as if my child could shield me from the truth. I told myself I was paranoid, that she was cruel, yes, but not that. Michael's face hardened. I tried to ignore it too. I didn't want to ruin this night. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But when she threw that wine at you and he did nothing? That wasn't just cruelty, Emily. That was arrogance. That was ownership. They think they've won. The room tilted around me, my heart breaking in ways I didn't think possible. To lose my husband was one wound, but to know his betrayal was tied to Vanessa, the woman who tormented me, the woman who had just vowed herself to Michael, that was unbearable. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "This ends tonight. No more pretending, no more games. I won't let her make a fool out of me, and I won't let them destroy you." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise, vibrating with rage. I stared at him, my breath shallow, my body trembling. And in that moment, I realized the truth was about to erupt into the open, no matter the cost. Michael paced the small side room like a caged animal, his tuxedo jacket pulled tight across his shoulders, his hands clenched into fists. I sat on the edge of the sofa, still trembling, my ruined dress clinging to me like a scar. The weight of his words echoed in my head. This ends tonight. It was his wedding day, the night he was supposed to begin his future. Yet here he was, preparing to expose the darkest betrayal imaginable, his bride and my husband entwined in lies. He stopped suddenly, turning toward me with blazing eyes. I won't let them walk out of here thinking they've fooled everyone. They think they can humiliate you, humiliate me, and still keep their secrets. Not tonight. I shook my head weakly, fear rising in my chest. Michael, if you do this, if you expose them in front of everyone, it will destroy everything. Your marriage, your family's reputation. My voice broke. Are you ready for that? His expression hardened. I'd rather face the truth than live a lie. Vanessa already destroyed this marriage the moment she chose him over me. And your husband? His voice faltered, laced with disgust. The moment he chose her over you, he destroyed his too. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to stop him, to shield him from the fallout. But part of me knew he was right. The poison had already spread. All that was left was to rip the wound open and let the infection spill into the light. Michael straightened his jacket, his jaw set. They think tonight belongs to them, but before this night ends, everyone will know who they really are. I rose shakily to my feet, clutching his arm. Please, don't do this for me. Do it because you need to, because you deserve better. He nodded slowly, his grip tightening over my hand. We both deserve better. Together, we stepped back into the hallway. The hum of the orchestra reached us, mingling with bursts of laughter and clinking glasses. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent of unease. The guests hadn't forgotten the spectacle. They were waiting for the next act. As we walked toward the ballroom, my heart pounded so hard it hurt. Each step felt heavier, the marble floors echoing our approach like a drum roll. My palms were slick with sweat, my stomach twisted with dread. What if they turned it against us? What if no one believed him? What if Vanessa spun her lies so well that I ended up looking even more foolish? But when I glanced at Michael, his face was carved from stone, unflinching. He wasn't a man second-guessing his choices. He was a man ready for battle. We reached the edge of the ballroom. The sight hit me like a wave. Vanessa laughing loudly, her hand still resting possessively on Mark's arm. They looked too comfortable, too intimate, while the guests pretended not to notice the way their bodies leaned toward each other. Michael's chest rose and fell sharply. His eyes narrowed, burning with fury. And as he stepped forward, the room quieted, sensing that something explosive was about to unfold. The moment Michael stepped into the ballroom, the energy shifted. Conversation stuttered to a halt, laughter died mid-breath, and the orchestra faltered into silence. Guests turned, their faces curious, sensing that something had snapped. Vanessa noticed first. Her smile froze, her hand tightening on Mark's sleeve as her new husband's gaze locked onto her. His eyes burned with a fury that sent ripples of unease through the crowd. "Vanessa," Michael said, his voice loud enough to carry across the hall. It wasn't the gentle tone of a groom addressing his bride. It was sharp, edged with betrayal. "Do you have something you'd like to tell me?" The room went still. Forks clinked against plates as they were set down. A hush fell like a heavy curtain. Vanessa blinked, her lips parting in feigned confusion. "What do you mean, darling?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, her smile trembling at the corners. Michael laughed bitterly, the sound cold. "Don't play innocent with me. Not after what I've seen. Not after what everyone has seen tonight." Murmurs rippled through the guests, heads swiveling between Vanessa and Mark. I stood near the back, my pulse thundering in my ears, my breath caught in my throat. Mark shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. "Michael," he said carefully, "this isn't the time or the place." "This is exactly the time and place," Michael snapped, his voice cutting through the silence. He took a step forward, his presence dominating the room. "You humiliated Emily, my sister-in-law, on my wedding day. You thought no one would notice the way you two look at each other, the way you whisper when you think we're not watching. But I noticed, and I'm done pretending." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Some guests covered their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed looks. The whispers grew louder, swirling like a storm. Vanessa's face drained of color. She released Mark's arm abruptly, her composure cracking. "You're imagining things," she hissed, her voice shrill now. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile in front of everyone?" Michael's jaw tightened. "How dare you make a fool of me? Of all of us?" His gaze flicked briefly to me, softening for a heartbeat, then hardened again as it returned to her. You couldn't even wait until after the vows to show your true self. Mark raised his hands, palms out, trying to calm him. Michael, listen, you're overreacting. You're ruining your own wedding. Michael turned on him, his fury sharp as a blade. No, Mark, you ruined it the moment you betrayed your wife with mine. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, murmurs exploding all at once. A woman dropped her glass, the shatter ringing out like a gunshot. Every eye turned to Vanessa and Mark, their guilt painted clearly on their faces. Vanessa stammered, her lips trembling. Mark's face flushed, sweat beading at his brow. For the first time, the smug confidence that held them together seemed to crumble under the weight of truth. Michael took another step closer, his voice low but seething. Go on. Deny it. Tell this room you're innocent. But know this. I have proof, and once I show it, your lies will be ashes. The ballroom vibrated with tension. Gasps still echoed against the vaulted ceilings, whispers flew like sparks, and all eyes locked on Michael as he stood in the center, unyielding. Vanessa's painted smile had completely vanished, replaced by a mask of fear. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hand tugging at his collar, sweat glistening at his temples. Michael's voice rang out like thunder. You think you can stand here, in front of my family, in front of my friends, and deny what you've done? Then let's show them the truth. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out his phone. The glow of the screen lit his face, stern and furious. Guests craned their necks, whispering furiously as he tapped a few times, then raised the phone high for all to see. The speakers crackled, and then a recording began to play. Vanessa's voice, unmistakable, filled the ballroom. Don't worry, Mark. He'll never suspect a thing. You're the only one I want. A collective gasp swept the crowd. Faces turned pale, jaws dropped, hands flew to mouths. Mark's panicked voice followed on the recording. I should feel guilty, but when I'm with you, Vanessa, I forget about everything else. Emily doesn't matter. Michael doesn't matter. It's just us. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Shouts rang out, chairs scraped, the orchestra members lowered their instruments in shock. Some guests muttered prayers under their breath, others cursed outright. I stood frozen near the back, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might collapse. The words pierced me, confirmation of what my instincts had screamed for months. The betrayal wasn't just real, it was undeniable. Vanessa's face drained of color, her lips parting in horror. She stumbled backward, her hands trembling. That's not real, she shrieked. He doctored it. He set me up. But Michael was ready. He swiped again, and photos appeared on the projection screen that had earlier displayed romantic slideshows of the couple. Only now it showed Vanessa and Mark in intimate embraces, stolen kisses, hands entwined, their eyes locked with a passion meant for lovers, not in-laws. Gasps turned into outrage. Guests booed, others shook their heads in disgust. One woman spat out, shameless, while another hissed, how could they? Mark's face twisted with fury as he lunged toward Michael. Where did you get that? He demanded, his voice cracking. Michael didn't flinch. You were sloppy. You thought you could hide, but lies always leave trails. Messages, photos, secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Vanessa's legs buckled, and she clutched the edge of the table for balance. Her perfect wedding makeup streaked as tears mixed with smeared mascara. Please, Michael, don't do this, she begged, her voice breaking. We can fix this. We can. Michael cut her off, his tone like ice. Fix this? You destroyed us before we even began. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everyone in this room, and you dared to humiliate Emily to cover your filth. All eyes turned to me. For the first time, pity shifted to outrage on my behalf. Murmurs of sympathy reached my ears, but they barely registered. My whole body trembled, torn between devastation and vindication. Michael lowered his phone slowly, his chest rising and falling like a man who had just set fire to his own world. And as Vanessa collapsed into her chair, sobbing, I realized the night wasn't just about betrayal. It was about justice finally beginning to take its course. The ballroom erupted like a storm unleashed. Gasps turned into shouts, whispers into accusations, and the once celebratory atmosphere disintegrated into chaos. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her lace gown stained with tears and shame. Mark hovered beside her, pale and sweating, his jaw tight as he scanned the angry faces surrounding them. You disgust me, a woman shouted from the front row. How could you betray your own family like this? Another guest slammed his fist on the table. Shameful. On her wedding day, no less. The orchestra quietly packed their instruments, unwilling to play another note for such a disgrace. Glasses clinked as some guests abandoned their seats, unwilling to be part of the farce any longer. The grand chandeliers glittered above, mocking the wreckage below. Michael stood tall, his chest heaving with controlled rage. You thought you could humiliate Emily, betray me, and walk away untouched, he said coldly. But tonight, you've destroyed yourselves. Vanessa's parents buried their faces in their hands, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. Mark's father rose from his seat, his expression carved from stone. Mark, he said sharply, his voice echoing through the hall, you have disgraced this family. You've thrown away your wife, your child, and your honor for this. He gestured toward Vanessa, his lip curling in disgust. Mark's face flushed crimson. Dad, it's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, his father cut in, his voice trembling with fury. You chose lust over loyalty, deceit over decency. You are no son of mine. Gasps rippled again. Mark staggered back as though struck, his mouth opening and closing, no words finding their way out. Vanessa tried to rise, her voice shrill and desperate. Michael, please, listen to me. We can still fix this. You love me. You said so in your vows. Michael's eyes blazed. Those vows meant nothing to you the moment you broke them. You humiliated me before we even cut the cake. There is no fixing this. The guests shouted their agreement, their voices rising in condemnation. Throw her out, one man yelled. And him too, cried another. The weight of their judgment pressed down on Vanessa and Mark, crushing them under the collective disgust of everyone present. For once, they had no smirks, no excuses, no power. Just two exposed traitors stripped bare in the harsh light of truth. I stood near the edge of the crowd, my hands trembling over my belly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't the one being judged. The stares that had once burned holes in me now turned like arrows toward them. The vindication was sharp, bittersweet. But even as they crumbled, I felt no joy, only sorrow, for what I had lost, for the life I thought I had, for the man I once believed in. Vanessa fell back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark dropped his gaze, his face hollow with defeat. The mighty had fallen, and the crowd roared with satisfaction. Michael's voice cut through the noise like steel. This marriage is over before it even began. And as for you, Mark, your lies end here too. And as the ballroom doors swung open, I realized their downfall was only the beginning of my own reckoning. The ballroom, once a stage for my humiliation, now turned into a theater of justice. All eyes shifted from Vanessa's sobbing form and Mark's defeated silence to me, the woman they had tried to break. For so long I had been invisible in this family, the quiet outsider tolerated but never respected. Tonight, that invisibility shattered. I stood frozen at first, uncertain if I should even meet their eyes. My dress was still ruined, the deep red stains a reminder of the cruelty I had endured. But when Michael's voice rose above the chaos, calling my name, something inside me straightened. Emily, he said firmly, gesturing toward me, his voice ringing with conviction. You are not the one who should be ashamed tonight. You are the victim of their betrayal, and you deserve to be seen for the strength you've shown. Gasps echoed. Dozens of faces turned toward me. For the first time, I wasn't being scrutinized with judgment, I was being acknowledged. Vanessa tried to protest, her voice raw. She's nothing but. Michael's hand shot up, silencing her. Enough, you've said enough. Every vile word you've thrown at her ends here. Tonight, the truth belongs to Emily. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from release, from the weight lifting off my chest after months, years of swallowing pain in silence. My hands trembled as I placed them over my belly, grounding myself in the life I carried. Guests who once whispered cruel things now looked at me differently. I heard murmurs of sympathy ripple through the crowd. Poor girl, she never deserved this. She's stronger than I thought. She carried herself with dignity, even when they tried to destroy her. A woman I barely knew approached cautiously, pressing a handkerchief into my hand. You're brave, she whispered. Don't forget that. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion. Mark lifted his head finally, his eyes bloodshot. For a brief second, guilt flickered there. Emily? But I cut him off with a single look. I had begged for his defense, for his loyalty, for even a sliver of the love he once promised. He had chosen silence. He had chosen Vanessa. There was nothing left for him to say. Slowly I lifted my chin. My voice, though soft, carried through the hushed hall. I may not have come from money, I may not dress like you or speak like you, but I know what loyalty is. I know what love means, and tonight I know one thing for certain: I deserve better than this. The crowd erupted in applause, not wild or celebratory, but steady and strong, like a tide rising to lift me up. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I was the woman who had endured cruelty and still stood tall. My dignity, stripped away hours ago, returned to me tenfold in that moment. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was reclaiming myself. And as the applause echoed in my ears, I knew the next chapter of my life was waiting just beyond those ballroom doors. The ballroom doors finally closed behind me, shutting out the chaos, the whispers, and the shattered remnants of a wedding that would forever be remembered for scandal instead of love. I walked slowly into the night air, my ruined dress heavy against my skin, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time in so long, I wasn't hiding in silence. I had faced my humiliation, endured it, and emerged stronger. Behind me, Vanessa and Mark were left to the fury of their families. The fallout was swift and merciless. Guests whispered that Vanessa's marriage was over before it had truly begun. Michael, humiliated yet resolute, announced in front of everyone that he would seek an annulment immediately. Vanessa's parents couldn't meet anyone's eyes, drowning in shame at their daughter's disgrace. As for Mark, his downfall was equally brutal. His father publicly disowned him, his colleagues whispered about his lack of honor, and his future, once filled with promise, crumbled in a single night. The man who once stood tall in expensive suits now looked hollow, stripped of pride and purpose. Together, he and Vanessa were pariahs, bonded not by passion but by the ruins of their own deceit. But their ruin was not my focus anymore. I had carried their betrayal like chains, but no longer. My baby's gentle kicks reminded me that my life wasn't ending, it was just beginning. In the months that followed, I chose myself. I filed for divorce, reclaiming my freedom. I moved into a small apartment filled with sunlight, modest but warm, a space where I could breathe without judgment pressing down on me. My colleagues at the preschool rallied around me, their support a balm to my wounded spirit. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. When my son was born, I held him in my arms and wept. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I promised him a life built on love, not lies. He became my reason to rise each morning, to keep going when the nights felt long and heavy. And love, the kind I once thought was lost to me, found its way back. Not in grand gestures or false promises, but in steady kindness. A colleague, someone who had watched quietly from the sidelines, began to walk beside me, helping with groceries, visiting after long days, laughing with me when I thought I'd forgotten how. It was slow, gentle, real. Not a whirlwind that burned out, but a steady flame that warmed me. Looking back on that night, I realized Vanessa and Mark hadn't destroyed me. They had freed me. Their betrayal pushed me to reclaim my strength, to demand the dignity I had once surrendered, to carve out a future brighter than anything they could ever touch. Now, when I watch my son giggle in the sunlight, I know this truth. Betrayal does not define us. What defines us is how we rise from it. And I rose. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you powerful dramas about love, betrayal, and redemption. Stories that remind us we are never truly alone. Click subscribe now and be part of our family.